Hey y'all, in this lesson we are taking a look at point-slope form. Our I can statement is, I can write and graph linear equations in point-slope form. We have seen how to write and graph linear equations using the slope and the y-intercept in slope-intercept form. However, the y-intercept is not always easy to see, so we also have other ways to write and graph linear equations. In example 1, we'll look at writing an equation in point-slope form. We are given that a line with a slope of 1/2 passes through the point 3, -2. Now you can write the equation of a line using any point, and we call that x sub 1, y sub 1, and the slope m. So again, slope is still m. In point-slope form, which is y minus the y1 equals m times x minus the x sub 1. So from our situation, we know that the x value is 3, the y value is -2, and m is 1/2, because slope is 1/2, and they gave us the point 3, -2. We now simply plug these numbers in where they belong in the formula. We replace y1 with -2, we replace m with 1/2, and we replace x sub 1 with 3. We simply need to simplify, noticing that it's y minus -2, so we'll change that to y plus 2 equals 1/2 times x minus 3. And we have written an equation in point-slope form. In example 2, we'll look at what if the slope is not given and they give us 2 points. The first step is to find the slope of the line using the 2 points, like we've done in previous lessons. We'll use our slope formula that says that we find the difference of the y values over the difference of the x values. So in our 2 points, we have 3 minus 1 and 2 minus -4. Using the calculator, we can find that this is going to give us 1/3. Now, the step that's missing is that 3 minus 1 is 2, and 2 minus -4 is 6. So we really get 2/6, which reduces to 1/3. Then use that slope and one of the points to write the equation. For example, I'm going to use the point 2, 3, the second point given to us, and the slope of 1/3. Y minus 3 equals 1/3 x minus 2. In this case, I don't need to simplify, and my final answer is just that, because I don't have subtracting a negative number. You could use the point -4, 1, and you would still end up with a true equation, but it would look a little different. You try writing the equation for a line that passes through these 2 points. Make sure you find the slope of the line, then use the slope and one of those points to write an equation. In example 3, we are going to look at how to graph a linear equation given to us. We are looking at what is the graph of y minus 3 equals -2/3 times x plus 1. The first step is to identify a point on the line from the equation and plot it. So in this case, we have our equation. Right now, we don't really care about the slope, so we'll ignore that. We also want to make sure that our equation looks like what that general form is. So instead of keeping that x plus 1, we want to have x minus, and it would be -1. This helps us to see that we are looking not for the point 1, 3, but -1, 3, which is here on the graph. Then we will use the slope to plot a second point. In this case, our slope is -2/3. -2 is the vertical change, and 3 is the horizontal change, also known as the rise and the run. So we were going to go down 2 and right 3 to get to our next point of 2, 1. Finally, we have 2 points. That's all we need. We can now draw the line. You can see how this is helpful when we cannot really tell exactly where it's crossing the y-axis, but we can still plot the graph. Here is one final problem for you to try. Given this equation, plot the graph on your own. To summarize our point-slope form, we know that the point-slope form is useful when you know the slope and at least one point on the line. Algebraically, the general form looks like this: y minus y sub 1 equals m times x minus x sub 1. Again, the x sub 1 and the y sub 1 comes from a point. Those will be numbers. And the m is the slope. So as numbers, here are two examples of what an equation might look like in this form, and the graphs for each one to remind you of how to graph. Your next steps are to submit your 3.6 notes, complete the Build 3.6, and take your 3.6 mastery check. Then you can continue on to the next lesson. Good luck!